This is a funnier video to watch, but this is the better content video.
In this video, I'm going to show you how nuclear weapons hidden by the United States are connected to real-life government brainwashing programs, and that is connected to Dr. Edward Richter's darkest secret, and somehow the real-life conspiracy that he himself is intimately tied to. To explain how all of this is connected, we need to carve the video out into chapters. We'll start by showing some examples of government brain.
Do you think Milo's just gone mental? I want to meet this man one day, but this man has gone mental. Like, there's some points where he's linking real life conspiracy theories to a theory of what's happening in the video game, and I understand the idea of the real life affects the Call of Duty timeline because, well, it affects the Black Ops timeline because it's it's vaguely based off of the real life Cold War. Vaguely. Very vaguely. Why can't I get to past round 17? Why? Why? I'm gonna fucking crush you out. Milo, tell me! Fuck. I'm gonna go get Maybe I can do it. Or maybe on the second. We'll run it back. And maybe next time I run it back, I won't be drunk. But we will run it back. Yes, I don't have a load of food in my hand. You're trying to slander me again, aren't you?
Brainwashing, both in game and in
You're trying
real
to slander
life.
me again,
we'll
saying I have a
all of
bunch
that
of food in
stuff
my
is
hand.
linked to Call of Duty Black Ops 4, Call of Duty Vanguard, Call of Duty Cold War, Call of Duty Black Ops 6. Like, they're all connected. There is a dark secret hidden in plain sight here, which I'm confident that I've discovered. So, without further ado, let's start with Chapter 1, brainwashing. The most famous example of brainwashing in Black Ops history is Alex Mason in the Black Ops 1 campaign, which takes place in the 1960s. So let's rewind the clock a little bit and see how that all went down. At the time, the Cold War was in full swing, and Mason had just been sent to Vietnam as part of a highly classified team called MACV SOG, or MACV SOG, or just SOG for short. This SOG unit was led by none other than Frank Woods. And while there were other SOG personnel in Vietnam at the time, which we'll come back to, Frank was the team leader for Mason's little unit. So I'll let him explain a little bit more about what the deal is with SOG.
Back in '64, the CIA gave up control of covert operations in Southeast Asia, handed it over to the U.S. military. That, MACV SOG was born. Missions are S&D, sabotage, black propaganda, strategic recon, POW rescue.
So that was SOG's sort of overall ethos, but what were they doing here in Vietnam specifically? Well, there was a Soviet defector that was in Vietnam at the time who they knew had information about bioweapons that would be pertinent to the US's interests during the Vietnam War. So, Frank Woods and Alex Mason together...
Okay, we've got something here, and this is like interesting information about the Black Ops 1 storyline, but I need to piss. So, give me a minute. Maybe 3. Maybe 9. I'm back.
Richter's candidate, because bear in mind, Richterson, by the time Requiem is formed and the Cold War Zombies story events start taking place, he's director of Project Janus, okay? He is calling the shots from above. And so it's ultimately going to be down to him if Weaver is the one that's getting drafted here. And if he's got Weaver in his back pocket, right? If he's got Weaver under his thumb because he has had just been sent to Vietnam as part of a highly classified team called MACV SOG, or MACV SOG, or just SOG for short. This SOG unit was led by none other than Frank Woods. And while there were other SOG personnel in Vietnam at the time, which we'll come back to, Frank was the team leader for Mason's little unit. So I'll let him explain a little bit more about what the deal is with SOG.
Back in '64, the CIA gave up control of covert operations in Southeast Asia, handed it over to the U.S. military. That, MACV SOG was born. Missions are S&D, sabotage, black propaganda, strategic recon, POW rescue.
So that was SOG's sort of overall ethos, but what were they doing here in Vietnam specifically? Well, there was a Soviet defector that was in Vietnam at the time who they knew had information about bioweapons that would be pertinent to the US's interests during the Vietnam War. So Frank Woods and Alex Mason together went to try and find this mystery defector, but in a very weird twist, when Mason found the defector, it turned out that it was actually just Reznov. Or at least that's what Mason thought. So where did Mason know Reznov from? Well, Mason originally met him in a prison labor camp in Russia called Vorkuta. And while Mason was there, he was brainwashed by Friedrich Steiner, a Nazi scientist working for the Russians. This brainwashing was then meddled with and resulted in an imaginary version of Reznov being planted in Mason's brain. This is why Mason was seeing Reznov as the mystery defector, despite the fact that, by all other accounts, Reznov had been long dead for several years, having died in the escape attempt from Vorkuta. So this is our first brainwashing example, and
Milo,
we see the effects of it throughout the Black Ops 1 campaign, with Mason even hallucinating at one point that he killed the president, John F. Kennedy. However, it's important to note that this was brainwashing done in Russia, and the Americans were also doing their own brainwashing experiments as well. Chapter 2. American brainwashing. The second brainwashing example brings us right back to the Vietnam War, but viewed through a slightly different lens. So at the same time that Woods and his SOG team were busy with Mason hunting down the defector and then finding Reznov, seemingly, there was also another team leader called Adler who was also working with an SOG team in Vietnam, and he'd been tasked by the CIA with recovering nukes that the United States had actually smuggled into Vietnam, and they had been tasked by the CIA with recovering a nuclear bomb that the US had previously smuggled into the country in secret, which they obviously wanted to prevent from falling into enemy hands. The reason the nuke was even there to begin with was because of a top secret US operation called Fracture Jaw, where American nukes were hidden all around Vietnam in case the US government decided that they wanted to end the war prematurely by just blowing the whole country up. And while you might think that that sounds like a really goofy premise for a video game mission, this was a real thing. Operation Fracture Jaw was a real government plan, and they did actually intend to use these sorts of weapons against the North Vietnamese troops in January of 1968. Now, at the time, several high-ranking US politicians, including Eugene McCarthy, warned the public that the US was preparing to nuke Vietnam, and so, to avoid backlash, the plans that the government was forming were quickly abandoned about a month later. And this is all real stuff. Like, this is actual history. So you're maybe wondering now, okay, where does the brainwashing come into it, right? Well, when we're playing the mission in-game, we're playing as this person called Bell. Bell wasn't actually in Vietnam at all, which might be a bit confusing because this is all Vietnam, and this is all Vietnam. So how was Bell not there? What actually happened was that memories of Vietnam were implanted in Bell's brain by Adler. And this had been done because Bell was a Soviet spy, and Adler wanted to try and get information out of Bell. And so he thought, okay, well, I'll give Bell all these false memories of us being buddies together in Vietnam, and that'll convince Bell that they should trust me, right? And we learn this thanks to this scene in the game where Bell is strapped to a chair chair in a CIA facility, and Adler reveals everything. He reveals that Bell's a Soviet spy, and that they implanted memories in Bell's brain, and all that stuff comes out into the light. And this is interesting. It has pretty big consequences because it means that we now have seen an example of American brainwashing on a Soviet, and we've seen an example of Soviet brainwashing back in Vorkuta on an American, Mason. And just like I said that Fracture Jaw was a real-life government operation, so too was the American brainwashing program that was used on Bell. That was a real thing, and its name was MK Ultra. Now, before we dig further into MK Ultra itself, let's explore some of the ramifications of the stuff that we've just spoken about. We know Mason was originally brainwashed in Vorkuta, and later we discover that Mason was brainwashed in that way while he's being interrogated while strapped to a chair under the control of the CIA. We also know that Bell was strapped to a chair and interrogated in that chair. But not only was Bell interrogated, but they were also brainwashed in the chair by the CIA. So that poses the question, if Bell was brainwashed in those circumstances, couldn't the CIA have also brainwashed Mason when he was in very similar circumstances? And if so, that opens up a whole new can of worms about the Black Ops 1 story. For example, could the CIA have planted whole memories in Mason's brain to try and make him a scapegoat for certain things? Or maybe Mason did actually kill Kennedy and the CIA handlers are trying to figure out how he did it, and so they're running back the playbook that they used with Bell. They could be inserting fond, patriotic memories into Mason's head to try and make him trust them so he'd spill the beans on how he did it. If we look back at the ending of Black Ops 1, it's really weird because it's so patriotic, like to the point of parody. And so what if that memory, right, that overly patriotic memory is actually purely fictional and it's been placed there in his head just to make him open up about Kennedy? Now, this is a rabbit hole that we could talk about for hours, honestly, but I want to make sure that we stay on target here and we begin talking about MK Ultra. Chapter 2.5? Just give me a second here, okay? So before we start chapter 3, I get asked by you guys a lot, what can you guys do to support me to make sure that I can still keep making as many whiteboard videos as possible in the future? I can make them higher quality. I can get even more whiteboards, right? Like, what can you guys do to help contribute to that, right? And because these videos take so long to make, it is a real investment of my time and energy and my team's time to make them happen. And that is where things like this come into the picture. So this is my mini Milo U2's figure, and this is one of the many Zombies officially licensed U2's figures available on their site. This guy's only available for a limited time. These guys are only available for a different limited time. And if you guys are interested in these and you go to the U2's site and you're buying, for example, the Jug Machines or the other Zombies figures, and you use code MILO, that will give me some kickback and that will directly contribute to me making more videos like this in the future. And similarly, if you purchase a mini Milo as well, that also obviously helps support me and my channel. And this isn't just any old mini Milo. He has his own mini whiteboard as well. So this especially is whiteboard themed. We're on brand right now. So yeah, like I said, links are down below. You can use code MILO for a discount on the Zombies figures. And you can also, while stocks last, pick up a mini Milo as well. So I appreciate your understanding, guys, of me giving this a quick mention to help support the channel. With that said, let's move on to chapter 3 and MK Ultra. MK Ultra was a human experimentation program that started in 1953 and ended in 1973. It was designed and undertaken by the CIA to develop procedures and identify drugs that could be used during interrogations to weaken individuals and force confessions through brainwashing and psychological torture. Sounds pretty familiar, right? The CIA also wanted to understand if they could make Soviet spies defect against their will. Sound familiar? And they wanted to know if the Soviets might be trying to do the same thing to US operatives, just like happened to Mason in Black Ops 1. MK Ultra staff would do things like administer high doses of psychoactive drugs like LSD, and they would do that to subjects who hadn't even consented to taking those drugs. And the researchers would then combine those tests with experimentation with torture techniques like electroshocks and sensory deprivation and isolation. And these are all things that were used on both Mason and Bell in their respective stories. Now, just so you can understand the scale of the program here, here's what a former director of the CIA had to say about it. Apparently, over 30 institutions and universities were involved in the program. And like we said, they
Okay,
secretly gave LSD to unaware subjects in social situations.
Yeah,
so can you imagine just
MK
how
Ultra
terrifying
like
that would be?
weird thing.
You're just going about your life. You're just living, minding your own business, when all of a sudden you start tripping and having this absolutely horrible
MK Ultra is like a incredibly like strange thing that the US government did. It fucked with their own citizens. They fucked with like everybody. It wasn't just the people that they employed. It was fucking no matter what. There was like the whole thing the world had come out through when MK Ultra got like declassified. It's fucking strange, but the content that has been made from this idea is crazy. You know about Polybius? Polybius is the idea of a game that was a MK Ultra experiment where you would play the game and you would go insane because the game would administer you drugs as you played it. There's a Nightmine video on it. It's not a real thing. It's ARG. It's a very interesting story, and I admit, I think MK Ultra could have happened. MK Ultra could have happened in any country that has citizens and wants to experiment on psychoactive drugs. They will experiment on them. There is a lower class, and there is what's the fucking there's a descriptor of like people that are not paying attention. The less dead, like homeless people, prostitutes. The no matter what government, they could be I'm grown. No. These aren't things I believe. These are things that could happen. I don't think that they've done this, but these are things that could happen. I don't want to be like, the government's bad, we need the government. The government, if there's like, we need a surrounding people of like, that will decide what the country wants to do. Because if you don't, you're going to have war. We're going to have just random people fighting each other in the streets, and maybe maybe fuck cults. You know, fuck cults. You don't want no fuck cults. Do you want fuck cults? You want fuck cults, don't you? You dirty fucking dog.
horrid experience and thinking that all the people around you are turning into demons and stuff like that. Like, it would be so bad. And the crazy thing is they didn't just administer these to people they didn't like, but they also gave these doses to their own employees. And this happened to the point that it basically became an occupational hazard of being part of the MK Ultra program. For example, there's one report in particular of a CIA agent who had their morning coffee drugged and was then seen later running maniacally through the streets of Washington, D.C. because he thought he was seeing a monster in all the cars that were driving past. Horrid. And that's not even the worst of it. So the worst case of it that I'm aware of, or at least that's been publicly reported on and is allowed to be seen by the general public, is one when an army medic named Frank Olson, who, by the way, had never taken LSD in his life, was covertly dosed by his CIA supervisor. So it was administered to him against his consent, and it was their own employee. And 9 days later, he plunged to his death from the 13th story of a New York City hotel room.
Okay,
so,
maybe they're not dirty dogs. Maybe they're just
or
murderers.
was he potentially pushed? The publicly known story is that the drugs that he was given had sent him into a deep depression, and that had caused him, tragically, to take his own life. But the real story of what happened here might be even worse. Sometime before Olson was drugged, he'd gone to his CIA supervisor and he had said, honestly, I don't like the morality of what we're doing right now. He felt like MK Ultra was in too much of a either moral gray area or just flat out corrupt morally. And so not only did he express that, he even made it clear that he wanted to resign from the CIA because he simply didn't agree with what MK Ultra was doing. So doesn't it seem just a little bit too convenient that somebody would have all this classified information, right? All this clearance access, etc. And then they would express the fact that they didn't feel like what they were doing was morally correct. And all of MK Ultra, in fact, was
Like, I get the idea that Milo's using real world like information as conjecture within the story of Black Ops and zombies, and it makes sense because it's based off of like the real world in the Cold War. But this could be seen as like not helping. Like, it could just be the truth. I don't know, man. Oh, oh, man, oh, man. I don't know, 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 man. Come on, Milo. Let's go.
Morally bankrupt, and then that person mysteriously just died shortly thereafter? Could it not be possible that he was drugged by his CIA supervisor because he had expressed his discontent, and they knew that if given a dose, it would drive him towards a very grisly end? Perhaps, rather than anybody physically pushing him off the ledge and causing him to fall to his death, the CIA knew that if they just gave him a mental push, that would still achieve the same effect. And then there'd be no way that they could be implicated because Olsen just did it himself. In isolation, you might think, nah, there's no way that the government could be that cruel, especially to people working for the government. But when you look at everything MKUltra employees got up to as part of their research, it actually starts to seem pretty likely. And not only that, but the government clearly knew that they were wrong, because years later, during investigations into illegal CIA activity, Olsen's surviving family were invited to the White House and received a personal apology from the president. That doesn't just happen to anyone, right? That happens when the government really knows that it's messed up.
Maybe
the following
he's not
year,
wrong.
they accepted a $750,000 check from the US government, and in exchange, they promised not to file...
God, the US do their hush money right, man. Come in, guys. Come on. Hi, I'm Richard Nixon, and I want to apologize for killing your husband and your father and your grandfather. So I'm going to give you $750,000 in hush money, and if you use that right and invest in treasury bonds, give me back your money. I don't want your money. I don't want you to have the money. Give me your money. I'm gonna tax you. Your hush money, it's mine.
A claim against the government to expose what truly happened. And if you convert that $750K to today's money, that's $4.5 million. So clearly,
that's just
the government
in inflation.
was really willing to pay to keep those MKUltra secrets as secret as possible. So this in itself is nuts, right? The fact that this is a real thing, none of this is made up. None of this is just from a video game. This is all real life. That's crazy in itself. But the origins of MKUltra somehow are actually even worse. During the early 1940s, during World War II, Nazi scientists working in concentration camps carried out interrogation experiments on their human prisoners. As part of this, they injected those prisoners with all sorts of substances, including hallucinogens like barbiturate and mescaline as well. The aim of these experiments was to develop a truth serum, which would, in the words of somebody that worked in the camps, eliminate the will of the person being interrogated. And, I mean, it was World War II, right? It was the Nazis. Alongside all that stuff, they got up to all sorts of other horrible business. So, fast forward a couple of years, the Second World War ends, Germany loses. What happens to all those German scientists? And this is where this thing called Operation Paperclip comes in. So, what was that? Well, Operation Paperclip was the mechanism through which the United States hired Nazi scientists after World War II and brought them to the United States to continue their research. And again,
the thing with like Operation Paperclip is that the Americans didn't get all of the Nazi scientists. The Nazi scientists went fucking everywhere. It wasn't just a one size fits all. A lot of the worst fucking people went to South America. There was no extradition at the time, so we've got. Have you looked at like a lot of South Americans? They have a lot of white DNA in. They have like a lot of Germanic DNA in them, and it's all weird thing that we don't bring up, that like Brazil and Argentina have a fucked amount of like Nazi descendants. But it's not like it's not as bad as what the Japanese did with like Camp 34, or Camp 30, whatever the fucking camp had. There was a camp in Japan that was doing heinous experiments on people. They would like boil people alive to see at which point people would have their skin start to slough off. Oh shit. Oh yeah, I pressed M by accident.
Real thing. Through the course of Operation Paperclip, more than 1,600 German scientists, professors, and other experts in their respective fields were taken from Germany and given employment in the United States. And of course, not all of
this is kind of discussed in the zombie timeline with Shinonuma. Shinonuma is a Japanese experiment camp where they experimented on element 115, but like it's a group. It's a group one. It's the big like Illuminati group camp that experimented on element 115. But that's still like the Japanese experiment camp.
of them were Nazis, but several were ultimately confirmed to be former members of the Nazi Party, including the SS. And these scientists were brought in for a variety of reasons, right? To work on the US nuclear program, the US space program, and plenty of other things as well. And there's a really strong argument to be made that alongside this, they were also brought in to work on MK Ultra when that was set up. So that would mean that the MK Ultra experiments are basically the twisted kind of American continuation of the World War II Nazi experiments. And the Soviets were doing the same thing as well.
He's bringing up this, but the Soviets are rather their own thing. The Soviets didn't go over to the US. After World War II, the Soviets were ends with the Americas and the Axis and the Allied powers. Like we were in intensive allyship because the Soviets were against the Axis powers, but they were not against. But they were still somewhat against us. We had a whole other political idea of democracy. They had communism at the time. They still somewhat have communism. They have communism. Like, you want to say that. The current period of the Russian and the Chinese world are in a democratic state, but they're not. They're really not. Like, you can imagine that, like, Xi Jinping will get voted in because he's gonna get voted in because they're gonna fuck with the votes. What's the big premise here? Okay, we're gonna let Milo speak because he has some interesting ideas, and he looks like a crazy person in this frame right now. And I can barely see. There's two Milos. There are two Milos.
To be clear, it wasn't only the Americans doing this, but they had their own version of it, and that is how Friedrich Steiner, the German, ended up working for the Russians. And to remind you, Friedrich Steiner was the guy that brainwashed Mason, or so we think, in Vorkuta. So this is all starting to line up, right? The Soviets brought in a German to work on bioweapons, and he ended up doing brainwashing stuff for them. Similarly, the Americans brought in Germans, and they ended up doing brainwashing stuff for MK Ultra. Like, there's some symmetry on both sides there. Just to be clear, just to really hammer this point home, all of this stuff was real history, right? Friedrich Steiner in the game, but the rest of it, real history. So the question is, where else do we see MK Ultra coming in the games? Chapter 4, a demonologist. To answer the question of where MK Ultra next appears, we need to go back in time just for a moment to introduce a couple of new characters, and then later in their stories, we'll see where MK Ultra...
Demons? Demons? Alucard? Vampires. Do you want to play some Vampires Survivors, guys? There's no one here. I'm speaking to myself. Why do I do this? Why do I speak to myself? I threw up earlier tonight. And I know why, but the only reason why I want to stream every now and again. I like creating content. Meow, 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 meow.
Rears its ugly head. And to begin with here, I just want to make something abundantly clear, okay? We're going to be going back here to the Call of Duty Vanguard Zombies story. And some of you might be thinking, the Vanguard Zombies story isn't canon with the Black Ops campaign, right? Like, those two universes are not linked together. However, this isn't actually the case. And in fact, campaign and zombies are canon now. So this all started because the events of Tag der Toten took place in Black Ops 4 Zombies. And at the end of that map's story, the old Zombies multiverse got closed off. And since then, all Zombies maps in Cold War Zombies, Vanguard Zombies, Modern Warfare 3 Zombies, Black Ops 6 Zombies, etc., they've all taken place in the same universe as all the Call of Duty campaigns. They are unified now. So, about Vanguard Zombies, like I said. In Vanguard, we meet this new character called Gabriel Kraft. Now, at first, Kraft is a professor at the University of Leipzig in 1939.
This is the motherfucker that died in the last
actually a
map.
professor of demonology. And he works there alongside his assistant, which is this person called Franz. However, in 1939, this Nazi called von List comes along, and he basically told
I didn't play this
Kraft
fucking
that
game.
he had to start working for the Nazis or bad things would happen to him. And originally, he refused. He was like, I don't want any part of that. I'm not a Nazi sympathizer. Leave me alone. And so what did von List do? He killed Franz. Just in cold blood, and then to make Kraft's life even worse, he arrested him and threw him into an SS military prison. In the prison, there were a ton of historians and archaeologists and all sorts of other people that had backgrounds in things like demonology, right? Which might be of interest to von List, because von List wanted to track down these mythological objects for this mysterious occult goal that he had for the Nazis. And while Kraft was in this military prison, the story basically repeated itself, where Kraft once again said, you need to work for me to hunt down these mythological artifacts that I need for my nefarious goals. Kraft said no, and then von List started threatening Kraft's spouse. So this person called Sasha was being threatened, and Kraft was like, okay, if you're going to threaten Sasha, fine, I'll do what you need me to do. So that's the sort of beginnings of the Vanguard Zombies story. But 5 years pass, the events of Vanguard Zombies takes place, and throughout that, we as allies...
Like, I know this isn't real, but the Nazis had, like, a weird occult sect in where they believed that... What was it? They had, like, the beliefs of Madame... There's a 18th century madam that had a whole other... It was just sort of like the Nazi Aryan sect within them. There was a person that had written a book, and they had started to believe this book in the past. It was like a weird occult, like not a cult, but like a cult belief in this story and this fiction that had been created in the past. This is like an entirely different thing. This is a fucking stupid fucking zombie ass bullshit, man. This is canon to the zombie storyline. Is this a canon to the new zombie storyline? Because the new zombie storyline fucks with me. Because the old zombie storyline was like the old zombie storyline in my brain is done, dead, out there. Like Richtoven's there, Sam's there, but they're not the same people. They have the same names, they have the same faces, they have the same voice actors. They're not the same people.
Allied operators help defeat von List and put an end to his plans. And right at the end of that, just when Kraft should have been able to go on his merry way and have a nice rest of his life with Sasha, we find out that von List had actually already killed Sasha years ago and had been pretending that Sasha was still alive for all that time just to get Kraft to work with him. And so you can imagine,
this is
Kraft is absolutely devastated by that. Finding out after all this time that Sasha's been taken from him he's broken. He's a broken man. And as you can probably also imagine, that despair that he's feeling lasts a while. It lasts for several years.
I like this
so
whiteboard.
what we're going to do here real quick is we're going to fast forward to the next time that we see Kraft in game, and then we can talk about what happens in the blank in the middle a little bit more as well. Chapter 5. Shocking revelations. The next time we see Kraft is decades later in 1991, which is in the build-up to and during the events of Citadel des Morts. At the very start of that year, Kraft should be very close to turning 100 years old, because he, remember, was born either at the very end of the 1800s or the very beginning of the 1900s. So he's a very old man. And unfortunately for him, just like happened during World War II, he ends up getting captured that year. Except this time it's not by the Nazis, it's by the French syndicate, led by this guy called Franco. And they're being paid by Project Janus director Edward Richtofen to try and extract information out of Kraft. Richtofen has his own crazy goals and aspirations, right? But just like we saw Von List try and get information out of Kraft to help him on his quest for mythological objects, so too are we seeing a similar thing happening here with Richtofen's own personal quests. And so, as instructed by Richtofen, the French syndicate crime family gets to work, and they begin trying to extract information from him, but he holds steady and he doesn't let any info slip. Now, luckily for Kraft, while this is all happening, Gregory Weaver, who you'll recognize from the Black Ops 1 campaign, is breaking out of Terminus Island, which he'd been imprisoned in for the last couple of years by Richtofen, incidentally. And because he was really mad about being imprisoned, Weaver is now hunting Richtofen down, and the trail leads him to Citadel des Morts, where Kraft is being held prisoner. So Weaver goes through that map's Easter egg, and it seems like Kraft is going to be freed. But then in the final moments, zombies break into Kraft's little room, and he is mortally wounded, meaning he dies moments later. But just before he dies, he shares some crazy revelations with his final breaths.
Richtofen, where is he? We know he contacted you.
Please. Please don't kill him. He is my son.
So in news that was a bombshell to the whole community, Richtofen, okay, is Kraft's son. So if Sasha's dead,
in this
what
world,
happened between World War II and now to mean that Richtofen became Kraft's son? Like, did he adopt? Was he a biological son? Like, what happened there? And then also, maybe a bigger question that you're asking right now is, where's MK Ultra? Like, where do they come into the picture?
No, I'm not,
so
Milo. Milo, I'm asking whether this affects the fucking whole storyline of whether Richtofen's a whole thing with fucking World War II, and like, I don't understand this new timeline. I'm lost. I'm lost, Milo. Tell me, why is there a poster that tells me the timeline of the old universe? Why does the Revelation universe matter at all anymore at this point? Can I just be told that the world doesn't matter and this new Richtofen is a different man? He's just got the same face and the same voice, and he's a German cunt. Okay? Okay, tell me, Milo. Milo, please. Tell me that Richtofen's out of ammo, and the survival tactics, and Tank Dempsey's dead. Tank Dempsey doesn't exist anymore. I want you to tell me the truth, Milo.
It all together, all of this, and everything over there as well. Chapter 6, Richtofen's Dark Secret. So like I said, we're going to cover this gap here between the 1940s and the 1990s. That's World War II with Von List and stuff, and that's 1990s with Kraft ultimately dying. The key detail from the 1940s is that by the end of the 40s, Kraft is left without Sasha. No more spouse, no more hope for the future, just depression and sadness. And this lasts a couple of years, but then sometime in the mid-1950s, Kraft has an idea. He thinks to himself, well, I always wanted to raise kids with Sasha, so what if I adopt a kid now and just raise that child on my own in Sasha's honor? So he goes to an orphanage and he adopts a boy who was none other than Edward Richtofen. Now, unbeknownst to Kraft, Edward had not been in this universe for very long, right? He was suffering from heavy amnesia, and he also experienced tons of nightmares and night terrors and things like that. And he'd often be found rocking back and forth, saying things like, "It's his turn," which maybe is a reference to Origins? I've got a separate video on that linked in the corner of the screen just there. Now, because of Edward Richtofon's struggles as a child, Kraft decided, you know what, I really want to do something good for him to give him a fresh start. And so, when he got an opportunity to change both him and his son's life for the better in 1957, he took it. And if you're connecting the dots here, you'll realize that in 1957, thanks to Operation Paperclip, the United States government had job openings for German scientists like Kraft that meant that he could join them and move to America. He accepted that proposition from the government, and he did exactly that.
Drugs?
And
You
he
want
moved to the
LSD
US,
drugs?
and specifically,
You want drugs,
he
Milo?
moved and joined MK Ultra. That was the research division that he was stationed in. And this has such big implications. Because remember, we said that in the 60s, Mason was being brainwashed by the Soviets, maybe, and then he ended up being interrogated by the CIA, and they could have used MK Ultra mind control brainwashing techniques on him. Well, we now know that those techniques, which we said in a previous chapter were so horrible, they were developed by Gabriel Kraft. Kraft is responsible for the stuff that MK Ultra was getting up to there. This has huge implications that are really easy to miss at first glance, because we really need to set up all of this backstory to get to the conclusions that we're about to unveil. So we now know that Kraft was developing these MK Ultra brainwashing technologies, right, as part of that research division, and we also know that Bell was brainwashed by that technology during the Black Ops Cold War campaign. So that means Kraft was at least partially responsible for what happened there. And not only that, but at the time, because it was then the 80s that Bell was getting brainwashed, Richtofen would have been grown up, right? Like, he would have been about 10 years old in 57, 20 in 67. By the time it's brainwashing Bell time, Richtofen's climbed the ladder in the CIA, right? We know that he climbed the ranks very fast because he ended up the director of Project Janus. So there's also a chance that not only was Kraft involved in all of this with Bell, but Richtofen was involved as well. This ties to some further information that we learn about Richtofen during the Citadel Day Moore map. Specifically, in intel from the map, we learn that Richtofen, who at this point is a fully grown man, right? He personally sent the French syndicate, who he was paying to torture Kraft, information on how best to torture him. And this is wild, right? Because we know that Richtofen is a high-ranking member of the CIA, right? We know that he's been around MK Ultra all of his adolescent and adult life. And it's one thing to pay someone to torture your dad, but it's another thing to give those people MK Ultra brainwashing and interrogation techniques that you are a master and expert in to use on your dad. Like, that's mental. And really, I guess it's just evidence of how obsessive Richtofen is about getting his goal when he's on his little quest here. And just to add to the stack of discoveries here, on top of this, we can infer that
get to the fucking point. I get it. Richtofen is using the information he's been given through his life, in this new life, to achieve his previous goal. His previous goal is going to be the Dark Ether, the zombies, control of complete domination of the Dark Ether. But, fuck off. Why? Why? I like the idea of two separate timelines of there is conspiracy in the US and the whole world with the Cold War, and there's Dark Ops. But why do these two stories have to intersect? I get the idea that they've intersected because of Warzone, and it makes them more money. It makes them more money because if the two ideas intersect in Warzone, there is a larger audience base that they will make more money off of. But it's just a worse story.
that not only did Adler learn the MK Ultra interrogation and brainwashing techniques from either Richtofen or Kraft in order to be able to interrogate and brainwash Bell, but those very same techniques were then reused on Jane Harrow, right? So the Kraft-Richtofen duo, Kraftofen here, are responsible for so many people being turned into MK Ultra test subjects. And there is a hidden test subject that nobody has clocked onto that I think could completely change the zombie storyline and the Black Ops storyline forever. We're going to talk about that next. Chapter 7, the final sleeper agent. This really is the unifying theory which ties all of this together. Everything I talked about on that original whiteboard, everything on all of the chapter whiteboards so far, it all comes full circle in this moment. So we already learned that during the 1950s, just before the 60s, Kraft joined MK Ultra, right? And then during the 1960s, he was working on MK Ultra, and meanwhile, Alex Mason was busy in Vietnam, right? We know that that took place during the 60s, and then later, he was interrogated by Hudson and also by Weaver. And this is interesting because we spoke about how Mason is in this CIA chair, right? And we don't know whether they also may have tried their own MK Ultra brainwashing techniques on him, as well as just the MK Ultra interrogation techniques, right? Like, we know he was getting electrocuted and all sorts of other stuff. What if they went a step further and brainwashed him, like we theorized about with the Black Ops 1 ending and with the Kennedy assassination, etc., earlier in the video. So if that stuff was all going on, right, or even if it wasn't, even if it was just interrogation, there still should have been
Kennedy. They get killed all the time.
Between Gregory Weaver, who was the second handler overseeing the interrogation of Mason when he was strapped to that chair in that facility, right? It wasn't just Hudson, it was Weaver too. So there should have been some overlap between Weaver and Kraft, because Kraft was working at MK Ultra. And at this point you might say, hold on, Milo, I've played Citadel Day more, and it doesn't seem like Weaver has a history with Kraft, right? Like, when they're there in the 90s, they're not yapping like old friends. That just doesn't seem to happen. So why doesn't Weaver remember Kraft if they did interface with one another back during the 60s while this was all going down? So let me just paint a suggestion for you, okay? A suggestion into the air, an idea, a theory, a hypothetical. We've already discussed the fact that we know in real life, MK Ultra employees, when they expressed discontent or discomfort with the morality of the MK Ultra research program, they ended up being slipped these hallucinogenic substances which actually caused them to die, right? We also know that MK Ultra was absolutely not afraid of testing its experiments on its own personnel en masse. Like, they were very willing to try and brainwash their own citizens, United States citizens, and their own team members in the name of progress for MK Ultra. And we know that those same rules apply in the game as well, because they did it on Mason, right? They used the MK Ultra interrogation techniques on Mason, a United States citizen. So there are no barriers here. There's no red tape. They do what they want. So what if during, I don't know, let's say the 70s, after the Black Ops 1 story had taken place, what if Weaver was like,
you know what, guys? What we just did to Mason, like how we messed that guy up, wasn't really that cool. Like, that was pretty weird.
And what if that meant he got put on a list as a potential candidate for MK Ultra to do some experimentation on, right? Who else was active in MK Ultra at that time? Kraft was active in MK Ultra, and so by that point was Richtofen starting to work his way up the CIA ladder, because we know that he became the project director of Project Janus very quickly within the CIA, and by the 70s, he's in his 20s, getting into his 30s. So what if Richtofen ended up swept up in some of the MK Ultra planning while he was in the CIA, just like and maybe while Kraft was busy helping Adler learn how to do the brainwashing required to brainwash Bell during the 80s, what if Richtofen was busy elsewhere, slowly, subtly, secretly
it's all fucking conjecture.
Brain. Just what if, okay? Hear me out. The first Cold War Zombies map,
literally
debuted
crashing
the new zombie story.
Literally crashing out because of the new zombie storyline. I don't. Milo, shut the fuck up. Give me solid information. Richtofen's my son. Yeah, was Kraft Manson in Vanguard? I don't give a shit if he was, because if Richthofen's his son, and I can take that literally, I can take the fucking literally, because it does link to origins, because Richthofen was brought back, but I don't fucking care, because that could literally just be his fucking biological son. He was brought back in origins. Where the fuck was he brought back from? Was that just a fucking random child brought out of the fucking ether? That's it. Children have to be born from somewhere. That could be Sasha's child. They could have fucked before she got fucking murdered. They could have fucked. She could have given birth to the fucking child, and then she gets killed. He doesn't know the child's been fucking born, and he meets the child later, and that's, ooh, that's my son. That's my son. That's Jackson. What's going on right now? I liked the old storyline. I liked it. I fucking liked it. He could have ended. They could have started new fucking bullshit, man.
Storyline following the events of Tag der Toten, okay, was Die Machine. First map in Cold War, and in the build up to that map, and then in the intel of that map, we learn that Weaver was drafted on extremely short notice. Like, it was a very, very quick decision to put him in charge of Requiem. And Requiem is basically the answer to the Soviet Omega group, who are researching Ethereum. So they're sort of like researching 115E type stuff. And they're also trying to use that power for their own good, right? They're trying to use it for the Soviet army, just like the Americans are trying to use Ethereum for their own means. So Weaver's drafted on extreme short notice to lead Requiem. Why was he chosen? Do we think it's because Weaver's just an outstanding soldier, right? He's very loyal to his cause, just sort of like Alex Mason was very loyal to the Americans, right? Do we think that it was because he was just a great candidate? Or do we think that maybe it was because he was the candidate? He was Richtofen's candidate, because bear in mind, Richtofen, by the time Requiem is formed and the Cold War Zombies story events start taking place, he's director of Project Janus, okay? He is calling the shots from above. And so it's ultimately going to be down to him if Weaver is the one that's getting drafted here. And if he's got Weaver in his back pocket, right? If he's got Weaver under his thumb because he has brainwashed Weaver, then he's going to know that any progress that Requiem makes is 100% going to be something that he's able to keep tabs on and he's going to be able to control. Like, think about it, right? Weaver says that he was tasked the same day that he was drafted with assembling a list of operatives that should join Requiem, right? Weaver put that team together. And this whole time, we've assumed he just chose, right? We assumed it was his choice. But what if he didn't? Right? What if ultimately he was still following the orders of Richtofen completely unbeknownst to him, right? Like, Weaver might have thought...
Bro, Milo, it's all what ifs. What if Richtofen was in charge of MK Ultra? What if Richtofen was a fucking dominatrix? What if Richtofen wanted to top me? What if Richtofen was on top of me? And I was coming, and I was a power bomb. Fuck. It's just happened. It's all fucking conjecture. There's no fucking evidence. And the evidence he fucking brings up is fucking shit. Genuinely crashing out because of the new zombie storyline. And I don't know what the fuck to do here. Am I a crazy person? Have I gone mad? Have I gone mad? Because this fucking guy in suspenders and fucking... Just give me fucking evidence. At least the old storyline has fucking evidence. You're all running on conjecture. Because it's a fucking massive conspiracy theory. Because everything the American government does is a massive fucking conspiracy theory. Why do we have to run this bit? Why do we have to run this fucking gambit in a storyline that made sense? Okay, it made sense in its own fucking context a couple of years ago. I am genuinely crashing out because of this stupid fucking bullshit, Milo, and I'm gonna fucking hurt somebody and it's probably going to be myself. You see that window there, Milo? I'm gonna fucking jump out of it. You want me to do that? I throw up out of that. If I jump out that window, I'm gonna land on my own fucking vomit.
Thought he was acting in the best interest of his country, but he might have just been doing Richtofon's bidding this whole time. And that could have made him a double agent all along. He really is the perfect candidate for being a mole in this way, right? Because ultimately, who's going to suspect Weaver? Nobody. Like, no one is ever going to think that Weaver, of all characters, is secretly going to be kind of evil, but also still kind of a good guy, like in this weird morally gray area. Everyone just expects Weaver is going to be the team leader who says, I hate Richtofen. But when you really start to think about it, all of his swearing about Richtofen, all of his hatred for Richtofen now, right, his desire for revenge on Richtofen could still be Richtofen's plan. He could have master engineered all of this because he needs Requiem and the strike team and all of these specific operators, right? The ones that he chose through Weaver, if he did indeed brainwash Weaver, he needs them to act exactly as they're acting for his own personal goal here. Like, we are puppets. We are complete puppets. We think that Weaver is telling us what to do, and that's a good thing, but maybe we're just following Richtofen's orders. And so Richtofen's true darkest secret isn't just that he was raised in the shadow of, and then ultimately in the belly of MK Ultra. It's not just that he paid to have his father tortured with the very interrogation techniques that his father might have originally devised. It's not the eventual arrest of Requiem. Like, it's none of that. It's the fact that the whole time, it was his plan all along. He knew exactly what we were going to do and when we were going to do it.
What is Warrior rapping about? And we watched the whole fucking video, but it's a lot of it is based on the fact that the fucking Call of Duty mainline story, the fucking campaign story, and the zombie story has linked together during these recent games, and I understand that. That's understandable, and you can take this conjecture where how the zombie the Black Ops main campaign is based off of the Cold War, and how MK Ultra and World War II was involved in this whole fucking bullshit. But I'm gonna fucking shoot someone. I'm gonna hurt someone. I'm gonna hurt myself. I'm gonna jump out the fucking window. You fucking yapping. Oh, bullshit. There's no solid fucking evidence. You know this. You fucking know this. Am I going crazy? Am I the one losing my mind? Am I crashing out over the new zombie storyline? Am I gonna fucking run into a fucking wall? Okay, let man yap for the last minute.
And he was always one step ahead because he knew that we would follow Weaver's orders. And Weaver's orders are Richtofen's orders. All of this craziness is typical Black Ops and typical zombies, right? It's questioning everything and doubting everything that you know, while also realizing that all of these in-game events are tied to reality, right? They are real-life things that actually happened. And so, you now have two options. First of all, if you want another injection of real-life conspiracies that the Black Ops games are based on, I've made this video all about the real-life history of Nuketown, which is pretty dark and disturbing, and I sunk a lot of research into it, so give that a click if that sounds interesting. Or, if you want to know more about the zombie story and about Gabriel Kraft specifically, I've got a separate video over here that dives into that. I really hope you like this particular video, guys. Hi guys, Mr. Off Waffles here. Today we're going to explain the ending